When police finally forced their way into the small, paint-peeled house on the edge of Great End Falls, Oregon, they expected to find a body. What they didn't expect was the walls. Every inch of them scribbled with words that made no sense, written in the same trembling hand. One phrase repeated over and over again, pressed so hard the pen had torn through plaster. There's no way out. The man who wrote it was still inside, kneeling in the corner, eyes wide open, mouth moving but no sound coming out. The moment officers touched him, he screamed a sound so raw it didn't sound human. And that was how the story of Daniel Hart began to unravel. If this story shakes you, remember to subscribe to Cold Case Secrets, where we uncover the truth behind the world's darkest mysteries. Great End Falls wasn't the sort of place you'd expect a murder to happen. A postcard-looking town tucked against the pines of northern Oregon, 2 diners, 1 hardware store, and a sheriff's office that closed early on Sundays. People left their doors unlocked. Everyone waved. Everyone thought they knew everyone else. Daniel Hart fit right in. 34 years old, quiet, soft-spoken, and polite in that shy teacher way. He taught art at the local high school, spent weekends hiking the trails behind the river, and lived alone in the old family house after his mother passed away. Students said he was kind. My co-workers said he was lonely. No one guessed what he kept hidden behind the calm. It started on a cold Thursday in late October. A woman named Leah Marin, a substitute teacher who'd recently moved to town, failed to show up for class. Her car was found 2 days later at the overlook above Cascade Ridge. The driver's side door opens. Key still in the ignition. No Leah. At first, it looked like a simple disappearance. Maybe she'd run off. Maybe she'd fallen from the cliff. But the ground search turned up nothing. Not a footprint. Not a scrap of clothing. Then a student came forward. He'd seen Mr. Hart talking with Leah after school on the day she vanished. They looked tense, whispering near her car. That was enough for the sheriff to knock on Daniel's door. He opened it with the same mild expression he always wore, invited them inside, and told them he barely knew her. They believed him mostly because there was nothing inside that house to suggest otherwise. No sign of struggle. No blood. No Leah. What they didn't see was the basement. Months later, when investigators reconstructed the timeline, they realized Daniel Hart's descent had begun long before Leah's disappearance. He'd been spiraling quietly through financial stress, loneliness, and an obsession with control. In his journal found later under floorboards, he wrote, "Order is the only mercy this world offers. Chaos must be corrected." When Leah arrived at the school that fall, Daniel felt something shift. She was outgoing where he was reserved, spontaneous where he was methodical. To him, she embodied the chaos he despised, and the attraction terrified him. Psychologists later described it as obsessive idealization turned destructive. He convinced himself he could preserve her the only way he knew, through stillness. That Thursday evening, he'd offer her a ride home. She accepted. He never took her home. Beneath the Hart house was a root cellar built in the 1940s. A cramped, concrete room with one bare bulb and a door that locked from the outside. Daniel had converted it into what he called the studio. Leah was kept there for 3 days. He recorded notes each night, clinical and detached. Subject calm. Subject crying interferes with clarity. Preservation requires silence. On the 4th night, silence came. According to the coroner's report, she died of asphyxiation. Whether accidental or deliberate remains uncertain, because Daniel's confession came much later, fragmented, fevered, unreliable. Afterward, he wrapped the body in plastic and buried it beneath the garden shed. He returned to school Monday morning as if nothing had happened. For several weeks, Daniel functioned normally. He taught classes, smiled when greeted, paid his bills. But something inside him began to rot. Neighbors noticed lights flickering in his windows late at night. He stopped leaving the house except for work. He stopped painting. He stopped sleeping. One student recalled him staring at a blank canvas for the entire period, whispering to himself. Another saw him flinch when she mentioned Leah's name, as if stung. Then came the noises. People living nearby reported hearing digging sound behind his shed long after midnight, followed by soft, rhythmic tapping that went on for hours. When asked, Daniel said he was fixing a drainage pipe. By December, the sheriff's office had no leads, and Leah Marin's case went cold. But Daniel couldn't let it go. He began writing letters to himself addressed to the caretaker. Each ended with the same line: "I kept her safe from the world. Why won't she stay quiet?" Psychiatrists later called it a guilt-induced psychosis. But to Daniel, it felt supernatural. He started hearing footsteps above him when he was alone. The smell of the garden made him nauseous. He swore he heard humming through the floorboards the same tune Leah used to hum during lunch breaks. He tried to drown out with white noise, then with whiskey, then by tearing up the floor in panic, convinced she was somehow still beneath it. One night in January, a snowstorm hit Great End Falls. Power lines fell. The entire town went dark. Daniel sat by candlelight, staring at the cellar door, until he heard 3 knocks from the other side. He ran, out the back door, across the yard, through knee-high snow, until he collapsed beside the shed. The ground had sunk slightly over her grave, a hollow, frozen dent. He dropped to his knees and started digging with his bare hands, whispering, "I'll move you, I'll fix this." By morning, neighbors found him half-frozen, muttering incoherently. He told them he'd lost his dog. They didn't even know he owned one. 2 weeks later, a local teen trespassed onto Daniel's property, looking for a shortcut to the creek. What he found instead was a shallow patch of disturbed soil and the corner of a plastic sheet poking through. Within hours, the property swarmed with law enforcement. The smell told them what they were going to find before the shovels did. Leah Marin's body was remarkably preserved in the winter frost. Her wrists were bound, but there were no defensive wounds. The pathologist noted something peculiar. Her fingernails were clean and almost polished, as if someone had tended to them after death. Daniel Hart was arrested that evening at the school parking lot. He didn't resist, didn't even speak, just stared at the flashing lights as if watching a painting come to life. At the station, Detective Ruth Hollis spent hours questioning him. She described him later as a man detached from his own voice. He confessed, but only in fragments. He said Leah was too loud. He said he wanted to make her still. He said she kept moving even after. When asked what that meant, he simply smiled. Hollis ended the interview shaken. Something about his calmness felt rehearsed, like he was performing sanity he no longer believed in. The DA prepared charges for first-degree murder. The town prepared for answers that would never fully come. But the story wasn't finished. While in county jail awaiting trial, Daniel wrote over 100 letters. Not to family, not to his lawyer Leah. Each began with "Dear El" and ended with "I'll see you soon." They weren't found until months later, after his mental breakdown. Every letter was written in perfect cursive except the last page of each, with a handwriting deteriorated into frantic scrawls of the same phrase. "There's no way out." Psych evaluators declared him fit for trial, though barely. They diagnosed him with obsessive-compulsive personality traits and emerging psychosis. But before the trial could begin, Daniel attempted suicide in his cell unsuccessfully. He survived, but something in him shattered for good. He was transferred to the North Willow State Hospital, a psychiatric facility hidden among the pines outside town. Locals called it the asylum in the fog. That's where the real descent began. In the hospital, Daniel spent hours staring out the barred window, whispering to someone unseen. Staff reported that he often held conversations with the wall, pausing as if listening. In the 3rd week, nurses found him sitting in a puddle of paint he'd begged from the art therapy room, trying to recreate Leah's face on the floor. He'd painted her eyes open. Then he started painting the same eyes on the walls, on his arms, even on the inside of his pillowcase. When the orderlies tried to clean it, he screamed, "She sees me now." After that, the staff kept him sedated. But sedation couldn't silence the voice he created inside his own head. Detective Hollis couldn't let it rest. Something about the timeline nagged at her, the way Daniel's panic had escalated after Leah's death, not before. She reviewed the evidence again, the journals, the letters, the recordings. That's when she noticed something small, buried in one of his notes. A date written after Leah's documented death. It read, "She moved again tonight." If true, that meant Daniel had interacted with the body after burial, or worse, after exhuming it. A warrant allowed a deeper forensic search of the Hart property. Under the shed, beneath the initial burial site, they found something else. Another pit, freshly refilled. Inside was a tape recorder sealed in plastic. The tape was degraded but partially playable. It contained heavy breathing, scraping sounds, and Daniel's trembling voice saying, "Stop humming, please, please stop," followed by silence. For Hollis, it confirmed what she'd suspected. Guilt hadn't just broken Daniel's mind. It had turned it into a prison. The tape changed everything. Detective Hollis listened to it a dozen times, headphones pressed tight, each replay scraping at her nerves. The voice wasn't only Daniel's. Beneath his ragged breathing, she could swear she heard another soft, almost melodic, whispering the same lullaby Leah used to hum in the teacher's lounge. Experts said it was an audio bleed, some fragments of his own early recording. Hollis wasn't so sure. Either way, the discovery sealed the narrative for the prosecutor. Daniel Hart was not a man who snapped once. He was a man who kept returning to the scene of his crime, compelled by guilt or delusion to relive it. The case would never see a courtroom. Before the trial date arrived, North Willow State Hospital called with a frantic message. Patient 321 Daniel Hart unresponsive, unaccounted for within the secure ward. It was the morning of March 3rd. Heavy rain turned the hospital's gravel road into a gray river. Staff swore Daniel had been in his cell at lights out. But at dawn his bed was empty and the window's inner bolts remained untouched. Only one new detail stood out, a single phrase scrawled on the wall above his mattress in thick black pencil. "I found the door." Security footage was useless. Between 1:12 a.m. and 2:03 a.m., the East Wing cameras glitched into static. When they flickered back, Daniel was gone. Search teams swept the surrounding forest for 2 days before concluding he'd likely succumbed to the elements. The terrain was steep, the weather brutal, and he had no shoes. Still, nobody was found. The official record listed him as an escaped, presumed deceased. Great End Falls tried to move on. The Marin family erected a small memorial near the overlook where Leah's car had been found. Flowers wilted, candles burned low, and the town folded the tragedy into its long list of things never spoken aloud. But silence doesn't erase a story. It only makes it echo. Spring returned to Great End Falls with its usual stubborn chill. The high school hired a new art teacher. The house on the edge of town stood boarded up, and Detective Hollis transferred to the county bureau. She told herself she'd stop thinking about Daniel Hart. Then, one morning in April, she received a brown envelope with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed the interior of Daniel's old basement. The same cracked concrete, the same low bulb. Only now, the floor was covered in dozens of new canvases, each one painted with the same pair of eyes. Beneath the photo, in marker, someone had written, "You left the door open." Forensics dated the photo as recent, but when investigators raided the Hart property, it was untouched, dust-thick, locked, undisturbed as a police inventory. The cellar door was sealed by the original evidence tag. No sign of entry. Still, the Polaroid was real, which meant someone had been inside. Over the next 3 months, envelopes kept arriving, always plain, always postmarked from small Oregon towns within 50 miles of Great End Falls. Each contained a photo of an abandoned structure, a barn, a church, a motel room with the same words written somewhere in frame. No way out. Some were scrawled on walls, others etched into mirrors or carved into wood. The handwriting matched Daniel Hart's exactly. FBI analysis couldn't confirm whether he'd survived, but Hollis felt it in her gut. The man hadn't escaped to freedom. He'd escaped into his own illusion, dragging pieces of it across the map. She drove to each location herself. Every one reeked of paint thinner and mildew, and every one contained a single candle burned down to the wick beside a half-finished portrait of Leah Marin. The press never learned about the photos. Hollis didn't want to panic. She cataloged them quietly, labeling each Hart site, followed by a number. By autumn, there were 8. Then came the 9th. It was found by hikers near the base of Cascade Ridge, the same overlook where Leah's car had been discovered. In a small clearing sat an old hunting shack no one remembered building. Inside, the walls were coated with layers of paint, black upon black, until the air smelled chemical. Pinned to the center beam was a single canvas. It showed Daniel's own face, distorted, mouth wide in a scream, eyes hollow. Across his forehead, in dripping red paint, he'd written, "I saw her blink." DNA on a discarded brush matched him. So did the prints on an empty paint tube. There was still no body. The sheriff declared the site evidence of ongoing delusion. Hollis thought otherwise. She believed Daniel Hart was alive, and circling back toward the place he started, the more Hollis studied his letters and journals, the more she realized Daniel's madness had followed a pattern of loops returning to the scene, rewriting the memory, repainting Leah's face in an endless cycle of guilt. Every time he found the door, he ended up back inside the same room, mentally if not physically. Colleagues warned her to let it go, but Hollis couldn't. She'd spent years chasing criminals who ran from their crimes. Daniel was the first she'd met who ran into him. She began keeping a map on her wall, string-connecting each envelope's origin. The pattern that emerged chilled her. The points formed a rough spiral, tightening toward Great End Falls. On a fog-thick night in late November, nearly 3 years after Leah Marin's death, the spiral closed. Power flickered across town, and residents on Pine Hollow Road reported seeing a figure walking barefoot through the mist, dragging something behind him. By the time deputies arrived, only footprints remained leading straight toward Daniel Hart's abandoned house. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed at first. Then an officer opened the basement door. The bulb flicked on automatically. The air was warm, heavy with turpentine. The concrete floor was covered in fresh paint and thick brush strokes forming a perfect circle. In the center lay Daniel Hart, alive. He was curled on his side, clutching a small dirt cake music box. When they lifted him, they began to play a broken lullaby, Leah's lullaby. His pulse was weak, his eyes open but unfocused. Paramedics carried him into the cold night while he murmured a single phrase over and over. She finally stopped moving. Doctors said his body was exhausted but stable. Mentally, though, he'd shattered beyond repair. He was transferred under heavy sedation back to North Willow State Hospital in the same ward. Same room number, same barred window. For weeks, he didn't speak. Then, one dawn, he requested paint. Supervisors refused. Instead, they gave him pencils. Within days, his cell walls filled again with words. Only this time, the message had changed. "She forgave me." When nurses asked who he meant, Daniel smiled faintly. "You'll see," he whispered. That night, alarms blared through the east wing. Staff found Daniel standing in the corner, hands red not with blood, but with pigment he'd made by grinding his own medication capsules into paste. On the wall behind him, written with trembling precision, were 4 final words. She opened the door. Minutes later, the lights cut out. When they flickered back, Daniel Hart was gone. Again, the outer lock showed no tampering. His window bolts remained intact. Only the faint smell of paint lingered in the air. The state declared him missing again, presumed dead. Hollis didn't believe it the first time, and she certainly didn't now. She resigned from law enforcement a month later, burned out and haunted. But even in retirement, the case followed her. Reporters wrote retrospectives, podcasters speculated, and urban explorers snuck into the Hart property to film videos for clout. Most found nothing. One didn't come back. 6 months after the second disappearance, a YouTuber named Tyler Green vanished while live streaming inside the abandoned house. The final minute of his footage went viral before being taken down. Viewers swore they saw movement in the dark behind him. A figure crouched near the wall, eyes reflecting the light. The audio captured a faint whisper, "No way out." Authorities never confirmed its authenticity. Tyler Green was never found. A year later, a letter arrived at Detective Hollis's new home address. No stamp, just slid under her door. Inside was a single sheet of drawing paper. On it was a charcoal portrait of her own face, rendered in striking accuracy. At the bottom, signed in neat script, "Thank you for opening the door. D.H." Attached was a flash drive. It contained a single audio file, 37 seconds long. The sound of shallow breathing. Then Leah Marin's voice saying softly, "Daniel, it's time to go." The file metadata showed it had been created the night before. Hollis stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then she picked up her phone and called the sheriff. "You need to reopen the Hart case," she said quietly. "He's not gone." To this day, no one can explain how Daniel Hart disappeared twice from a locked psychiatric facility, or where the recordings originated. The state lists him as deceased. Locals whisper otherwise. Some say he lives in the woods, painting eyes on tree trunks. Others say he never left the basement, that what escaped wasn't his body, but the guilt itself, wandering from place to place, searching for silence. What is certain is this: the phrase "no way out" continues to appear, spray painted on overpasses and alley walls across Oregon. Always the same handwriting, always fresh. Maybe Daniel Hart truly found his escape, or maybe he finally understood that there never was one. Some stories end with justice, others end with silence, but this one still whispers through the fog of Great End Falls, carried on the wind that moves through empty hallways and locked doors. Somewhere out there, a man once certain he could control death is learning that guilt doesn't sleep, and that every door he opens only leads back to the same room. And if you ever drive past Cascade Ridge on a foggy night and hear faint humming in the distance, don't stop, because in Great End Falls, some echoes are meant to be left unanswered. If this story shook you, make sure to subscribe to Cold Case Secrets, where we uncover the truth behind the world's darkest mysteries. Thank you for watching Cold Case Secrets.